Now, this is a very, very interesting a way of looking at how much you need to tackle poverty. And this is the notional estimate you have, where basically you look at a household which is poor. You've got your basic needs poverty line. You ask yourself, how much would you need to move this household to just above the poverty line? You add that up for all the households in the country and for all the different groups, and you get an idea about, well, really, how much resources would this country need if you were to eliminate poverty according to our basic needs poverty line? What's the relationship to GDP? What's the relationship to government expenditure? And when you do it for Fiji, right, it clearly it's a manageable problem if only our economy were growing. Yeah, and in dollar terms, right, it's only about 3.5% of GDP, and it's decreased from 3.5 to 3.1% between these two highest. That's not a huge amount of resources you need. And of course, it's a higher percentage of government expenditure. It's around about 10%, 11% of government expenditure. If you had that much extra in your kitty, you could eliminate poverty technically by a simple transfer of resources. Of course, we never do it like that. And I think it would probably be counterproductive just to give money to the poor. Although there are economists who are saying, give the money to the poor because they know what to do with it. The trouble is, it might end up, in Carlton Brewery and some Yangona Salud or something. But not a big problem. But it's a big problem if your economy is not growing. And if your economy had been growing by 3, 4, 5, 6%, which I believe the Fiji economy has been very, very capable of growing at, right? We would have probably, reduced our poverty, to maybe half of what we have now. But if your economy is not growing and your population is still growing, there's no way you can even tackle that. Basically, it's the growing population fighting for increasing share of the same cake. If the cake doesn't grow, you're going to got a bun fight on your hand, as Father Kevin Barr has had for 5, 6 years. And he seems to have lost that bun fight at one level. Huh? Yeah. The Australian High Commissioner talked about the importance of evidence-based, policy making. We cannot emphasize this enough, because whenever the Ministry of Finance sits down and tries to work out where the development fund should go, where the poverty alleviation resource should go, should it be on western side, central division, northern division, west, islands, whatever, always, and especially of course when elected parliaments were around, there used to be battles all the time with each parliamentarian trying to get more resources for his own constituency. I know we don't have that problem at the moment. But after 2014, that problem might emerge when people will start again to argue, where resources should go to. Right? And this is where hard, objective data, provided by the Fiji Islands Bureau of Statistics, it's no longer Fiji Islands Bureau of Statistics, that would be called sort of FIBS before, but it's not, thankfully it's called FBS now. They can provide good data, which can resolve a lot of these political conflicts if only the decision makers, do use this data. And I can assure you that, while people might think, and they used to think at one time, there's a Bainimarama at the head of FBS, so the data must be all tainted in some way. I can assure you, there's no political interference with any of the work done by the Bureau of Stats. They're all professionals, and they all do their work the way the professionalism requires it to. And the data that's coming out is very, very objective data. So, we should be able to use this data to make very, very important policy decisions that takes it away from the political conflicts. So, this is what we should be looking at. And those people in the rural areas always have a battle. For one thing, the decision makers are nearly always from urban areas, first reason. Secondly, the urban problems are very visible. You can see urban squatter housing, urban problems on the roads, potholes and all that, right? And of course, if you're an agency working with poverty, it's very easy to tackle urban poverty. It's there, very close. You can just go and improve the housing for squatters, and you've solved your problem. Whereas rural problems are scattered throughout the entire country. And as Ipeli was mentioning, you look at what you have to do to get to some household in the middle of Nitasiri somewhere, right? It's just as hard for poverty stakeholders, NGOs, and donors to address rural poverty, as it is for the bureau staff to go and get data from the rural households. And so always rural households get neglected. And I find that, that I don't think that any of our governments ever sat down in these last 30, 40 years and worked out, okay, let's look at all of our poverty alleviation work, let's look at all our capital development programs, our expenditure on roading, on water, on health centers, etc. Let's work out which proportion is going to the rural areas and which proportion is going to the urban areas. Because the data shows that 70% should go to rural areas. And I don't think that's happening at all. I think the actual proportions are probably the other way around. Simply because urban poverty is much easier to tackle, it's very close, it's manageable, and the decision makers are all from urban areas. So you'll spend $100,000 on tar sealing a road in Sukuna Road, but you won't spend that, on a health center which has been without medicine for the last 5 years. It's kind of, bread and butter issues that we face. And unfortunately, the rural